we often do.
Hello, Happy New Year to you all, and a warm welcome to Shaka Extra Time, a show that comes to you every Tuesday. Joining me live on set is Shaka Sali himself, aka the Kabale Kid. Hello, Shaka.
Hello, Paul.
How are you?
Well, I have to say that I remain somewhat simple, easy, and awesome, even though some fans of mine actually keep telling me that I should probably refer to myself as an awesome son of Africa.
Very, very good, very good. You've been away for a while. Welcome back. And what brings you? What do you have for us in this new year?
Thank you very, very much, Paul, for asking me that. And by the way, I honestly wish you a hugely prosperous 2020, and whatever else you and your family may wish. Well, I wish it all for you.
Well, the feeling is mutual. Shaka, a warm welcome to all our Facebook followers are watching us live. Shaka Extra Time is a show where you get to interact with your man here. He's back. So maybe let's start by him telling us what he's been up to.
First of all, I have to say, unfortunately, that 2019 did not end well. As far as I'm concerned, because I had a death in the family. I had a sister, Jenny from Shakamba, who died in the Ugandan capital, Kampala. And
my condolences to you, Shaka.
Thank you very much. I wanted really to go there and pay my last respects. But unfortunately, I also had to deal with what they call medical challenges. And my doctor said that they probably wouldn't advise me to make such a very long journey. So it didn't really end very well. But I think that 2020 is probably going to be hugely terrific, because guess what? I am actually going to be living through an experience that I have never tested, which is achieving a great milestone of having started a program called Straight Talk Africa, which was my brainchild, and having had the opportunity sincerely to host it since its inception on August 2nd, 2000. And so in August or September, we are looking forward to getting an opportunity to celebrate the 20th anniversary. And you know what that really means.
A bigger congratulations to you, Shaka. This is quite a remarkable achievement on your part.
Thank you very much. I hope to say that I have been able to do that by the grace of God. I have been lucky. And I sometimes think, in fact, that the Kavali Kid has really been blessed.
I can tell. You look like a blessed guy. Let's get going. Let's start off. Maybe let's talk about what everybody is talking about. Obviously, over the weekend, American president ordered the assassination of a renowned or a feared guy in Tehran, and it has caused a lot of reactions around the world. Maybe let's start by getting your thoughts on it, or your reaction about the assassination of one of the most feared guys in Iran.
You're talking about Major General Mohammad Suleiman?
Qasim
Suleiman.
Yes.
Yeah, you know, of course, there is a saying that when you talk about decisions that are made in this city, Washington, D.C., some of the decisions that are made can and could affect almost all of us globally. There's no question that there has been a lot of reaction one way or the other. But you know, there is bound to be even more reaction, especially when Iran, when it actually does what it has promised to do, which is to revenge. It says it is going to revenge the death of their second most powerful man in their government.
A lot of people are calling, especially allies, U.S. allies, are calling for the de-escalation of what's going on in Iran, but it looks like both leaders are at it. They are all vowing to revenge if one attacks the other.
You know,
is there an end in sight if this kind of rhetoric continues?
You know, Paul, there are no easy answers really when it comes to the relationship between Washington and Tehran, because it didn't simply begin with the assassination or the death of Major General Suleiman. The relationship, especially bad blood between Washington and Tehran, actually began back in 1953, when I think you were not yet born. You're talking about in Washington, the man who occupied the White House was a man called General Ike Eisenhower, a man who had been a World War II hero, who had commanded the Western allies that had taken care of Hitler. And in London, number 10 Downing Street at the time was also a very, very famous, very respected man by the name Sir Winston Churchill. He was the man occupying number 10 Downing Street. And then, of course, you also had a prime minister in Tehran, the 35th, in fact, prime minister of Iran, by the name Muhammad, what was, you know, this name is a very, very important name. I can't believe that I cannot somehow, you know.
You mean the Shah, is it the Shah of Iran?
No, there was a prime minister who was assassinated in 1953 because he was, in fact, nationalizing a lot of business. Mossadegh, Mohammad Mossadegh. He was a man who had, by the way, a PhD in law from some major university in France. He was also an author, administrator, a very highly respected man. He had introduced very significant, badly needed reforms in the economy of Iran. But the crime he made probably, at least according to what I have read so far, is to nationalize the oil wells in Iran. They were largely controlled by the British at that time. And so the British and American authorities decided to take him out at the time, to essentially orchestrate a coup that eventually overthrew him because they justified it in the sense that he was becoming socialist, and therefore he was shifting royalties from the West to essentially what was then the Soviet Union. And you know that was about pretty much at the time when there was this Cold War. And so records will indicate, and in fact some governments, including the United States, have even acknowledged that the Central Intelligence Agency, the CIA, and the British also equivalent, the Foreign Intelligence,
the
MI6. Yeah. They were able to essentially figure out a way of easing him out of power. They did not kill him, they overthrew him. He was imprisoned for some time, and later, in fact, he was also put under house arrest and eventually died. So really, when you look at the relationship between Washington and Tehran, it's not something that began yesterday. And then, of course, you know what happened in 1979. In 1979, there was a revolution. The Iranian people, especially the young people, overthrew the Shah of Iran. The Shah had been, of course, very, very loyal to Washington and London and Paris and all that kind of stuff. And the Iranian people overthrew him, and eventually you have the Ayatollah Khomeini. I remember people like Gub Sadek, who had actually gone to school at the nearby Georgetown University here, remarkably articulate and all that kind of stuff. You know, you had a man called Bani Sadra, who had been at the Sorbonne, the University of Paris, who hung around there for about 15 years, churning out research books and stuff like that.
So why don't you fast forward to now? What are we looking at now?
Well, I guess the thing is, you know, it's about what countries describe as vital national security interests. Obviously, a man like General Suleiman was probably one of the most feared, one of the most important, and one of the most dominant military commanders in the Middle East. You're talking about a man who was operating out of Tehran, out of not only Tehran, but also in Iraq, for example. In fact, he was hit at the Baghdad International Airport.
Right.
So he obviously was organizing and training militias, which were obviously supportive of policies of, you know, favoring Tehran. And by so doing, since of course Iran and the United States are not allies, are not friends, the Americans didn't feel good about it, and especially because he was also responsible for killing a lot of Americans, those in the service of the military and contractors and what have you.
Speaking about killing Americans, let's talk about terrorism across Africa. We have all these Al-Qaeda networks, Al-Shabaab networks springing up across the region. As we speak, again, over the weekend, some Al-Shabaab elements within Al-Shabaab attacked a military base in Kenya, killed an American, some 2 contractors, and several other Kenyans were injured as a result of this, I guess, like war on counter-terrorism. Your thoughts on that?
I think that before, in fact, we go to that, permit me to conclude a bit about the relationship between Washington and Tehran. I was talking about the revolution in Iran, but I had not talked about how that revolution, for example, did something that not many people could actually think that could be done. These guys, essentially what they did, they took over the American embassy.
Which they just did not too long ago.
Yeah, but this time they actually not only took over, but they held American diplomats hostage for a very, very, very long time. And even though at some point the United States under Jimmy Carter tried to send a rescue mission, that failed. The helicopters essentially, you know, essentially what they basically landed in the desert and what have you, and the whole thing collapsed. And even though they reached the point where they could do a bit of business together, they never really addressed the fundamental root causes of their relationship. And so neither country really had an opportunity, for example, to sort of reach what they call closure.
So we are seeing a repeat of what happened in 1979.
Pretty much. And so when you talk about the war against terrorism and what have you, I think part of the problem, again, it's been a very, very long time, because the war against terrorism, we've been talking about it since 9/11. This is now 2020. And yet, it seems to me that for the most part, the people who have been fighting the war against terrorism have actually only been, in a sense, dealing with symptoms. But what is really needed is to identify and address the fundamental root causes of what is it that makes it possible for young people, for example, to be tempted and join some of these negative forces and begin killing people. And you know as well as I do, Paul, you've been young yourself at some point. When you are young, you are unemployed, for example. You do not have opportunities for education in order to get a skill that is likely to help you at the end of the day. You can do anything on earth because you feel like you are invincible. You are attracted, in other words, to some things that eventually will provide you some short-term benefits. But this is also only because somehow the people who have power, the authorities, have not been able to address the issues that affect you. And I think that, in fact, the war against terrorism, I think that these forces, people that have power, should seriously look at the fundamental root causes and make sure that they deny those types of opportunities to the negative forces.
Let's go to a question here from David Onserio Monda. The continent appears to be the receiving end of attacks resulting from power games of major powers abroad. Iran versus United States. How can African leaders address this challenge?
You see, first of all, the only way African leaders are going to address some of those challenges is to get into the mode, the business of being very strategic. Strategic in the sense that they acquire the ability of creating jobs, creating opportunities for the increasingly changing demographics. These people are almost becoming the majority in Africa, and yet they don't see any hope. If they don't see any hope, they are going to engage in acts that are not going to be essentially making any positive contribution to society, and in the process, they are going to be stepping on other people's toes and what have you, and other people are going to react.
But one would argue that these major powers, for example, the United States, shouldn't be in the business of creating employment. As much as it wants to fight terrorism on the African continent, it shouldn't be in the business of trying to create employment for people. What is the responsibility of the governments in Africa? That should be left to the governments in Africa.
I probably put it wrongly. I wasn't thinking about the United States. I was actually thinking about African leaders. I was talking about those people who occupy positions that affect their populations. But they can go even a step further. They can figure out a way, for example, of entering into cooperations with the United States, entering into cooperations with the other countries, because at the end of the day, if you can bring about peace and stability, it is a thing that benefits both parties. It is mutual. You see, for example, there are a lot of young people who are doing the dying in the Mediterranean Sea. Why do they do that? Because they are actually running away from socio-economic political conditions that do not provide them the incentives of staying there. They are running towards Europe because they think that once they get to Europe, their lives probably will improve. There are also a lot of others who are trying to cross the Atlantic to come to the United States of America and all that kind of stuff. So I think at the end of the day, it is even in the interest of the United States it is in the interest of the European Union to work very closely with African governments so that together they can be able to create conditions that will put some kind of stop in this type of behavior. You need to build confidence, but you cannot build confidence on, for example, empty stomachs. You cannot build confidence.
Bombs.
Precisely. And can you imagine how much those bombs, by the way, how much in fact you spend to manufacture those bombs? And yet at the end of the day, once you drop those bombs, what do you get in return? You essentially develop enemies, not friends. And yet if you provide the scholarships, for example, so that young people can actually go to certain institutions to be trained in acquiring skill sets that can be translated into supporting their families, into putting food on the table and what have you. First of all, you are able to prevent the interest of those young people trying to come to your countries. The second thing is that you are also creating friends.
Employment.
You're creating employment. You are also creating friends. People like what you are doing. But if you, for example, use bombs, the language of bombing and what have you and stuff like that, you're creating enemies. And so you are not really laying a positive groundwork for your children or your children's children.
Yeah, interesting point there. Let's cross over. Let's maybe revisit something that we've talked about before. What's in it for these African presidents wanting to change their constitutions? There are reports as of today that the Ivorian president, Alassane Ouattara, intends to stay longer than his constitutional mandate. We have another chaos. We have been having riots in Guinea-Conakry because the 81-year-old Alpha Conde wants to hang around. What's wrong with these leaders?
You know,
what kind of message are they sending to us, young people?
You know, I wish I really had the answer, because I will disappoint you. I honestly do not have the answer. And I say this from the deepest, better part of the bottom of my Kavale heart and soul. But honestly, the only thing you can look at is people who are selfish. People who are selfish, people obviously who are not patriotic sincerely to their societies or their countries, rather people who are patriotic to their stomachs, the stomachs of their families and friends. Because let's face it, the names you have mentioned, for example, these are not people, sincerely, that need to worry about how long they can actually be in State House to be presidents. These are people who are very highly educated. You talk about Alpha Conde. Alpha Conde was actually a professor in France for many, many, many years.
That's correct.
I actually had the opportunity to dine with him when he recently came to the World Bank. I had the opportunity to dine with him. It's a very interesting man and all that kind of stuff. But I can't believe that he can get into the business of shifting the constitutional goalposts so that he can hang on to power. He's, in fact, the last time I checked, I think he's around 82. I mean, honestly. Then, and you know, he's very physically fit and what have you, very healthy. He is a gentleman. He's very intellectually alert. He is a man, frankly, who can do a lot of other things to contribute to the development of his own country. But at the end of the day, it doesn't seem to make a difference whether somebody is educated and not, because let's face it, I think that what is important...
Even Alassane Ouattara is a highly educated guy.
Talking about Alassane Ouattara, I know him a little bit more, in fact, than Alpha Conde. I used to be working on a world television which used to run Africa Journal, hosted by the great Maimuna Mills, my friend. I used to call him, I used to tell her that I was her quality royal subject. I used to be an analyst on Africa Journal, and she interviewed Dr. Alassane Ouattara, PhD, from, by the way, the Wharton School of Economics, the University of Pennsylvania, in the city of the brotherly love, an Ivy League. He got a PhD in economics from there. He had very, very good jobs, you know. He worked for the IMF for a very, very long time.
So he has deep pockets.
Until, in fact, he reached a point where he actually became the deputy director of the International Monetary Fund because his own people had denied him the opportunity to become president because they claimed he was not Ivorian enough, that his parents or whatever had actually migrated to the Ivory Coast from essentially Burkina Faso, which used to be called Upper Volta. This man has no business shifting the constitutional goalpost to hang on even for 1 second or 1 minute. He has deep pockets, as you said. He's a man that is very much liked because the French regard him as a Nyampara. He could actually go and rest, you know, in France. He could actually come here. He is a friend and an ally of the United States. He is not a man who has committed really a lot of crimes like some of his colleagues, killing a lot of people and what have you.
But some people would argue that when he took over from Gbagbo, he killed people. His people, he killed a lot of people. So maybe he's afraid of that.
Well, you know, the thing is, when you get into this business of being a ruler, especially in a country that is democratically challenged, there is a possibility that some of the decisions that you make could actually end up translating into some individuals losing life. But this is not a man, frankly, that you would put in a category of a lot of people who have created mayhem in their own countries, and therefore they actually feel so insecure that without the protection of the presidency, of State House, they don't think they could actually live even 1 minute or 1 hour after State House. And so they have to figure out a way of simply hanging on until divine intervention.
Shaka.
Or until someone, in fact, decides to figure out another way that is not agreeable to them, that helps them to lose that protection. So I think that this is an opportunity for me to say, if you are a president somewhere in Africa, no matter whether you are 70, whether you are 80, whatever, please respect your constitution because you are supposed to protect, defend, and preserve it. Otherwise, the international community should figure out a way of refusing to do business with them, just like they don't do business anymore with people who are beneficiaries of coups.
Well, Shaka, we've run out of time. Thank you so much. I look forward to hosting you on another edition of Shaka Extra Time. Before we go, my dad is celebrating his 74th birthday. Happy birthday, Dad. If you're watching, I wish you all the best. Thank you, Shaka.
Thank you very much.
Yep.
Keep hope alive.